The American voters have said resoundingly that immigration and inflation are two of the most critical problems that our country faces. And immigration is an area that the Trump administration is going to be very focused on. And it's an area of real concern to me because much of our nation's success is rooted in our ability to attract the best and brightest from around the world to work for American firms and to start American firms. Roughly half of all the firms in the Silicon Valley that have been launched in the last 20 years are led by immigrants. And I would say roughly the majority of Citadel's leadership team is immigrants. These are people that have come to this country, they've left everything behind because they believe in the American dream and the opportunity that our country represents. And yet, I think everyone agrees that the chaos on the southern border represents a broken immigration policy, where there's very little control over who comes into our country, whether they come here to pursue the American dream or for more nefarious reasons. I think there's widespread agreement across our country that we need to secure our southern border and that we need a far more orderly structure for immigration to America. So this has been a really important voice that the American voters have delivered to Washington. And I'm pleased to hear that voice, but I'd like to see Washington now execute on an immigration policy that is thoughtful, that protects this nation's great stature in the world of being the country you come to pursue your dreams. And on that note, for just a moment, I was in Europe last week and had a chance to talk to some of the most senior policy leaders in Europe. And do you know what they talk about? They talk about how Europe loses its best and brightest to America. They talk about how the Europeans have had a number of just absolute world-leading minds in AI, and how virtually all of them have left to come to America. We need to keep that position in the global war for talent. The second area that's very front and center on the minds of the American people is inflation, which I think ties into the economy holistically. And I think that for most voters, it's not clear what the right economic policy should be with a very fine, pointed pen. But they do appreciate that when your economy is at full growth potential, when unemployment is right around 4%, that is about as good as the economy should be, and yet inflation was running hot, and our deficit was running roughly 6 to 7%, which is a number that you would have last seen obviously during the COVID pandemic, and then prior to that in World War II. So at a moment in time where the US fiscal house should have been looking pretty strong, or in other words, our deficit, in the Clinton days was actually a surplus when the economic environment was similar. When the deficit should have been closer to zero and was running closer to 6, 7%, the American voter knows something's wrong in Washington. Now the challenge is, and this is, like you asked what I worry about, will Team Trump, will this administration be able to find a path to put America's fiscal house back in order? So that's one of my real concerns, because we cannot continue to run this level of profligate spending. And that's a big issue.